It's a story of a foreclosure, one of many on Hawaii Island, or it's a pivotal moment in the legal struggle of the occupied Hawaiian kingdom. In the least, it's a documentation of a Puna man's forced eviction from the place he's called home for more than a decade. At most, it's a glimpse of a hidden reality that clouds the title of every commercial and residential property in the state, and the linchpin to testing an international understanding of America's relationship to Hawaii.
Every state except Hawaii has a treaty.
It's a series in 5 parts by Big Island Video News entitled Defected, Testing Hawaiian Sovereignty. The former home of Kale Gumapak now sits empty on 2nd Avenue in Hawaiian Paradise Park. The bank foreclosed, Gumapak was evicted and taken away in handcuffs. But Kale's fight is not over. Claiming he was only following his own contract with a mortgage lender, Gumapak is seeking legal recourse at home and abroad with the help of Dr. Keanu Sai. Not only is Sai the lead agent of the acting government of the Hawaiian Kingdom, he also gives a mean PowerPoint presentation.
I make specific reference to the Matrix, Matrix 1. Okay. I'm Morpheus, and you're Neo, and you're about to take the red pill. You're going to see a version of the world that you've never seen before. Okay, I'm going to help you through that. And by the way, Neo is Keanu Reeves. Notice my name is Keanu Sai. He's my cousin. His father and my mom are first cousins from the Reeves Ohana in Kuli'o'o. He and I were actually named after my grandfather, Henry Keanu Reeves. So when I tell people we're actually cousins, they go, yeah. No, really, we are. We used to play together. And I still think his best movie is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures.
Here's video from a recent presentation done in Kona this year, part of the Kohala Center's Pu'ana Ka'ike lecture series. This talk occurs every year at the same time. Kamehameha III's birthday celebration, part of the same event that includes the well-known poke contest with Sam Choi.
The history of Hawaii since Kamehameha III.
Used with permission, this video illustrates Sai's argument.
So you might say Hawaii in 1893 was kidnapped, but it was treated like it was adopted. Problem is we can't find adoption papers.
And also captures the look on the faces of the audience as their perspective on commonly understood history becomes forever changed.
So when I see somebody and a blood vessel is about to pop, I'm going to try to ease it, make it much more simpler.
The story begins in 1843 with Hawaii's quest for sovereign recognition.
And that's when Kamehameha III realized through very good advisors that he needed to pursue the international recognition of the Hawaiian Islands as an independent state. And he needed to get that recognition from Great Britain, France, and the United States of America. On November 28, 1843, King Kamehameha III, through his envoys, was able to secure international recognition from Great Britain and France. This is the actual proclamation at the British Archives in London.
Sai makes it a point early on to explain who or what has the sovereignty in an independent state.
The government is the physical body that exercises the sovereignty. It is not sovereign, okay? And the reason is because a government can be overthrown without overthrowing the sovereignty. A case in point would be in 2003, the Iraqi government. Saddam Hussein's government was annihilated by the US military. Okay? But by overthrowing the Iraqi government, that did not equate to an overthrow of Iraq as a sovereign state. In the military, we call that occupation. And when I said we in the military, I'm a retired captain from the Field Artillery. So I also have that background as well as being a political scientist.
Sai explores the numerous international treaties that the Kingdom of Hawaii entered into at the time and details the citizenship and separation of government, an important distinction.
Yeah, very similar to the United States. But what's more important is Article 31 states that the Queen in 1893 was the chief executive. Her job was not to enact laws. Her job was not to interpret laws. Her job was to enforce law. And executive power includes police power. Okay? It includes administrative power. So her job was to maintain government, maintain civil servants, maintain tax collectors are employed, maintain the Department of Education. Yeah? The Board of Education was established back in 1845. Everything we see today actually is all from 1845.
Then Sy gets into the infamous act of treason, January 27, 1893.
The Hawaiian police force are ready to arrest these insurgents, about 30 of them, ready to arrest them for treason. But they can't. And the reason why they can't is because U.S. Marines were ordered to be landed the day before by the ambassador, John Stevens. And their purpose on the landing was to protect these individuals from the police, from getting apprehended. The Queen, she's in a predicament. What is she going to do?
Which gave rise to the Executive Agreement, the keystone with which all arguments over today's Hawaiian sovereignty are built.
Paul Newman, not the movie actor, but Paul Newman, who served as Attorney General under King Kalakaua. He was advising the Queen on what to do. And he recommended to the Queen that she assign, under threat of war, her executive power, her police power temporarily, until the president can investigate the situation. And that's what she did. So she yielded her authority under protest and assigned it to the President of the United States. At that time, that's President Harrison, Benjamin Harrison.
On this, Sy says the Queen's decision was wise.
If she took on the Marines, oh yeah, we would have a treaty of surrender that would effectively transfer Hawaii to the United States. So Queen Liliuokalani played it right, and she was a stateswoman. And I say this all the time. I am glad a woman was in charge in 1893. And I say that with sincerity. She was thinking. I'm not saying if a man was there, he wouldn't do the same, but my experience with men, sometimes they jump and then they think. Yeah? Locally, we call this, we say dantaran. Yeah? The local expression, don't play dantaran. Okay? Now, that local expression of dantaran actually comes from the old Superman movies. Dantaran. So locals, hey, don't play dantaran. Me, don't play Superman. Queen Liliuokalani was a superwoman.
However, at the time, the United States executive, President Benjamin Harrison, was unsympathetic to the Queen's plea.
President Harrison, he's not listening to this protest, yeah? Because that's not part of the plan. He's waiting for these people to arrive in Washington, D.C. so they can sign a treaty transferring all of Hawaii to the United States. Why would the ambassador do something so bold as to order the landing of U.S. Marines on the territory of a foreign country over the protests of the government? Because they wanted Pearl Harbor. The administration wanted the Hawaiian Islands as a military outpost to protect the West Coast from an invasion they felt from Japan.
On February 14, 1893, President Harrison went ahead and signed a treaty of cessation with the provisional government, made up of the insurgents who had ousted the Queen.
In fact, President Harrison said this was a popular revolt against a tyrant queen. No, and I'm like, okay, wait, separation of powers since 1864. They were painting the picture of Queen Liliuokalani as a savage.
The treaty needed Senate approval, but fate turned in favor of the Queen, at least temporarily. A new president was elected, and Grover Cleveland returned to office on March 4, 1893.
President Cleveland knows Queen Liliuokalani. They know each other. So when President Cleveland stepped in, he received the assignment of executive power from Paul Newman, who was appointed by the Queen as her attorney. In fact, he traveled to Washington. Queen Liliuokalani could not leave Hawaii. He traveled to Washington, and he hand-delivered that protest, and President Cleveland accepted it on March 9th, 1893. He immediately went to the Senate to withdraw the treaty, say, you will not look at this treaty until I find out what happened. From this information I received, the United States military was involved. He needs to investigate.
James Henderson Blount was sent to investigate, and his findings, issued on July 17, 1893, are known as the Blount Report. It found that international law had been violated. President Cleveland moved to restore Queen Liliuokalani's power, but as a condition, Cleveland wanted amnesty for the insurgents.
So President Cleveland had a problem, a big problem. He needed to see if the Queen, as a condition of restoration of the government, would agree that she will grant amnesty to these individuals after the government's restored. Now, at this point, the Queen cannot grant amnesty because the president still has the police power. But he wants something in writing from her. Thus, you're going to have negotiations beginning.
A settlement was eventually negotiated. An agreement was forged in two parts. First, the assignment of law enforcement.
The first agreement, called the Lili'uokalani Assignment, which binds the U.S. president and his successors to administer Hawaiian law, police power. Now, how does a president administer laws of a foreign country? Military. That's exactly how they did it in Iraq. Yeah, that's how they did it in Japan after World War II with MacArthur. The military administers the laws of an occupied country. This document, called an assignment, authorizes the president, and upon his acceptance, to enforce the law of Hawaii through the military.
The assignment also included the restoration of power to the Queen, but Cleveland needed congressional approval to carry out that restoration.
He needs to redeploy the U.S. troops back to Hawaii. At this point, U.S. troops are not in Hawaii. They're gone. They were ordered to leave. He's got to bring them back. So what the president needs to do, he needs to ask Congress for the authorization to use force. Also to appropriate money, for the deployment of troops.
But Congress was unwilling.
What Congress wanted, Pearl Harbor. That was the talk. They wanted Pearl Harbor.
Which left Hawaii in a state of civil unrest.
People are getting arrested by these insurgents. Who are these insurgents hiring to do that? Former military coming out of San Francisco. This place is loaded with mercenaries. Loaded. It is not really pleasant to live in Hawaii at that time. In fact, these insurgents were arresting people, throwing them in jail, confiscating their accounts, their lands. Their families couldn't eat.
At this point in his presentation, Tsai takes a moment to explain the power of an executive agreement like the one between the Queen and the President.
According to sole executive agreements, the United States Supreme Court in 2003 said, specifically, the President has authority to make executive agreements with other countries, requiring no ratification by the Senate or approval by Congress. We held that although an executive agreement might not be a treaty requiring ratification by the Senate, it was a compact negotiated and proclaimed under the authority of the President, and as such was a treaty. So those two agreements made between the Queen and the President that is now resonating today because of this research, those are binding treaties that nobody knew.
And another thing, those executive agreements are passed down.
That means if President Cleveland could not carry it out, every president thereafter is bound to execute that agreement.
Tsai gave an example of the binding nature of executive agreements in the modern era.
When Barack Obama was running for office, he made the campaign promise he's going to bring the troops home. Yeah? They say that's how he got into office. That's how he beat George Bush. But when he got into office, did the troops come home? No. It wasn't until last December. Okay? 3 years into his term. The reason why President Obama could not bring the troops home, because President Bush entered into an executive agreement with the Prime Minister of Iraq, al-Maliki, for the resurgence of troops in Baghdad, and the neocons of the Bush administration, Rumsfeld, Cheney, basically forced the Iraqi government to accept this agreement that U.S. troops and bases would be in Iraq for over 100 years. So when Barack Obama stepped into office, he had to renegotiate that agreement. And the Iraqi government knew what he needed to do in order to run for office again, and they used it against him. In fact, the Iraqi government was getting so many concessions that it almost was a different government with Obama than the government was with Bush. And people were kind of like, what are they doing? Why are they letting Iraq get away with so many things? Because Obama needed to amend that agreement, and he finally got it, and that's when the troops came home. Okay? Now that shows you the power of an executive agreement, but also the binding nature.
And President Cleveland's successors in the Oval Office had their sights set on Pearl Harbor.
Now President McKinley, he succeeds President Cleveland. And McKinley wants Pearl Harbor. Now he wants Pearl Harbor. His Undersecretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt, they want Pearl Harbor. They want it bad. He is completely ignoring these agreements because what he wants to do is to renegotiate another treaty. Another treaty on June 16, 1897. These same individuals, led by Lawrence Thurston, lead insurgent, still a criminal. He's in Washington, D.C., negotiating a treaty to transfer all of Hawaii to the United States. The problem for President McKinley, the U.S. Senate is required to ratify that treaty. Because it's bringing in territory. This is not a sole executive agreement. They're bringing in territory.
Meanwhile, back in the islands, Hawaiian activism takes shape.
And that is when the Hawaiian Patriotic League steps up. And these are the officers of the Hawaiian Patriotic League, okay, that was established in 1893. The person that established the league, Joseph Navahio Kalaniʻopuʻu. He's from the island of Hawaii, Hilo. They were also assisted by the Women's Association of the Hawaiian Patriotic League, headed by Mrs. Kuai Helani Campbell. And they managed to gather 21,269 signatures. As a result of these protests that was submitted to the U.S. Senate when it convened in December, by March of 1898, the treaty's dead. The Senate cannot garner enough votes to ratify because of these protests. It has effectively killed the treaty.
But then, war in the Pacific, as the United States enters into war with the Kingdom of Spain.
April 21st, the United States has to fight the Spanish, not just in Puerto Rico and Cuba in the Caribbean, but also Guam and the Philippines. Those were Spanish colonies. On May 1st, 1898, Admiral Dewey defeats the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay. That's the portrait of the battle. And he begins the occupation of the Philippines. Fighting is now concentrated in Puerto Rico and Cuba. The war would not end until December of 1898. This is May, the beginning. Well, word gets up to Washington, and Francis Newlands, a Democrat from Nevada, submits a House Resolution 259, annexing the Hawaiian Islands to the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. The problem is, a resolution is not a treaty. Yeah? A resolution is a congressional action limited to U.S. territory.
Some elected officials raise concern over the constitutionality of the Newlands resolution.
The congressional records specifically notes the debates. In particular, I draw on this one. Representative Thomas Ball from Texas. See, that's interesting. This guy's from Texas. Yeah? He stated that the annexation of Hawaii by joint resolution is unconstitutional, unnecessary, and unwise. That territory could only be constitutionally acquired by treaty, because treaties are international agreements whereby one country transfers authority and territory to another. You don't do that by passing a law, yeah, in a country. You need a treaty.
But the measure gets the votes it needs in the wartime political climate.
Over these constitutional objections and the territorial limits of congressional laws, the Congress approves the resolution and is signed by President McKinley on July 7th, 1898. On August 12th, at 12:01, Hawaii is occupied. The Hawaiian flag is lowered and the American flag is risen. And that is the first U.S. military base in Hawaii, Camp McKinley, 1898, August. That is Kapiolani Park. That's Diamond Head in the background. Yeah. Imagine what's going on in the minds of the people of Hawaii. Invasion.
What followed were a series of laws that ultimately resulted in Hawaii becoming the 50th U.S. state. Statehood was granted on August 21, 1959, and 100 years later, after the overthrow of Queen Liliuokalani, an apology.
And in 1993, the United States Congress passed a law apologizing for the overthrow. Sorry. Now, Native Hawaiians are being treated by the United States, as far as what they say, as similar to Native Americans. Yeah? Tribal status. That became the basis for what is called the Akaka Bill, or to get federal recognition of Native Hawaiians as an Indian tribe. A lot of misinformation in that apology law. A lot of misinformation. It's like football, I see yellow. Baseball, I don't see yellow. I now see the apology law with football rules, I see yellow all over the place. It's all wrong. All wrong. Yeah? But still limited to U.S. territory because it's still a U.S. law. We're not Native Americans. We don't have a history similar to Native Americans. In fact, the history I just showed you is very different than Native Americans.
Accepting that Hawaii is an occupied state that never legally entered into a treaty of annexation comes with accepting the numerous far-reaching consequences. In his lecture, Dr. Tsai jokes about one of those consequences involving the current Hawaii-born President of the United States.
The title of my presentation at Harvard and University of Massachusetts, because I needed to get something to get the attention of the faculty. Why the birthers are right for all the wrong reasons. President Obama was born in Honolulu on August 4th, 1961 at Kapiolani Hospital, the same hospital I was born in 1964. He attended Punahou High School in Honolulu, and he was elected president on January 20th, 2009. Article 2 of the United States Constitution says, no person except a natural-born citizen shall be eligible to the office of president. Natural-born is defined as a person native-born or born within the territory of the United States. President Obama was not born within the territory of the United States. He's another casualty with this information.
Meanwhile, coming back to Kale Gumapak in Puna, some folks are living out those consequences firsthand.
Historically, the titles to my property and all properties here in Hawaii are defective.
Armed with an understanding of Dr. Sai's presentation, we asked Gumapak what specifically makes all property titles in Hawaii defective. He said there are two things.
On your deed, the notary that notarized your deed has got to be a Hawaiian Kingdom authorized notary. Okay, it cannot be a state of Hawaii notary. Okay, and the reason for that, okay, is that there was never ever a legal transfer of the Hawaiian Kingdom over to the United States. So the legal entity is still Hawaiian Kingdom. So the legal notaries are still Hawaiian Kingdom notaries and not state of Hawaii notaries. And the second defect is that in order to hold all of the titles throughout all of the islands, okay, the office that should legally hold all of the titles has got to be under the jurisdiction of the Hawaiian Kingdom. All right. Instead, the office that's holding it, the Bureau of Conveyances, is under the jurisdiction of the state of Hawaii. So those two entities in itself makes that title defective.
Gumapak's interpretation has deep implications for Hawaii's real estate market.
All titles in Hawaii, both residential and commercial, are defective as a result of that. And we can go into all of the reasons why as a result of that. And when you go back into the Bureau of Conveyances, during the time period of the overthrow from 1893 to 1898, there's a huge amount of evidence.
Yeah. Next, the foreclosure fight begins and war crimes are alleged.
It's the bank that breached the contract. And now it's the judges and the sheriffs that are breaking the law.
Hawaii, in 1893, was kidnapped, but it was treated like it was adopted. The problem is we can't find adoption papers.
And Judge Freitas agrees. He dismisses the foreclosure case.
Has been a violation of the Geneva Convention, the commission of war crimes, and the commission of felonies by judges in the Third Circuit Court of the state of Hawaii.
It was totally unexpected, and they showed up at 7:10 in the morning. They came with fugitive task force.